Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Ooh, that was really loud. Hi, I'm Terry McCullough. I am the CEO of the No Ceilings Initiative at the Clinton Foundation. We work to ensure, that one better? Thank you. We work to ensure inclusiveness for girls and women, to advance rights and opportunities for girls and women throughout the world and here in the US. We have been thrilled to partner on tech inclusion and have these conversations here and in other arenas like Austin this spring. And I am really honored to be sitting here with this expert group to talk about developing an inclusive tech ecosystem. There are some that call New York City the capital of inclusive innovation. There are some that believe we could do more. It's going to be exciting to have a conversation around what works, the challenges to inclusiveness within this city, to ensure that the tech sector can work with the city to bring a vibrant and inclusive economy for all. So I'd love to just briefly introduce our panelists and then have them each tell you a little bit about what they do and the journey that brought them here to talk about an inclusive ecosystem in New York today. So to my immediate right, can you all hear me okay? Yeah? To my immediate right is Kathleen Warner, who is the Executive Vice President and Managing Director of the New York City Economic Development Corporation Center for Economic Transformation, a significant duty. To her right is Clayton Banks, co-founder and executive director of Silicon Harlem. To his right, Lee Moulton, head of strategic partnerships at Breather. And at the very end, we have Tom Ogletree, director of social impact at General Assembly. So Kathleen, can we start with you?
Thanks, Terry. I just want to say first out, I'm a big Wayne Sutton fan. So I've known Wayne for about 4 years, and the short of my background is I was the chief operating officer for the Startup America Partnership starting back in 2011, where we developed a national network of startup communities. And one of the things that matter most to me as a mission-driven human being was that to ensure that to look around the room sometimes and think about who wasn't at the table as we thought about entrepreneurship, because great ideas, great companies come from everywhere, from every demographic, every geography, and we don't often recognize that, celebrate that, support that. So that was something that I was, from the get-go, was very, very focused on when I was at Startup America. I've been at EDC, and I think I have the world's longest title, for about 6 months now. And I came to the role after swearing up and down I would not go into government. I went into government because it's an incredible role, an incredible organization. EDC itself is a very unique entity among economic development corporations, and being able to sit at the intersection of entrepreneurship, industry, government, and philanthropy to ensure that New York is the global leader in tech-driven, innovative industries with opportunities for all. That last piece of it being super important, opportunities for all, across one of the most diverse, rich, on all different levels, cities in the world, which is incredibly appealing to me. And I've been in the role 6 months, and lots of, I think New York is incredibly amazing and has worked to capitalize on its assets, the biggest of which is its diverse talent, but I also think it has a lot of work to do. So there's that.
Thank you. My name is Clayton Banks. I'm co-founder of Silicon Harlem, as Terry indicated. And Terry, thanks for having me, as well as Wayne Sutton and the Tech Inclusion team. It's a great event. What brought me here, besides that bing-bong train that I take every day, I'm here because we work extensively in Harlem, uptown Manhattan. And over the years, we have seen a variety of great movements in New York City and in the country, and oftentimes our community is left behind. And that started even with cable television, when we had the digital divide then. And when you're looking at broadband, we're having a digital divide now. And we're fighting, and me personally am fighting, for broadband to become a civil right, because civil rights was based on fairness. And if we want to talk about diversity and inclusion and technology and all of that, it starts with providing the fundamental tool, which is the internet connection. And so I'm here, and I've gotten here because we work diligently with that type of market. We look at that across the nation. We've got people here from Boston. We've got people here from Philly and other places, because those neighborhoods cannot be left behind. That's the most important thing when we look at our country. Our most powerful asset that we have in this country is our people. And when we leave large swaths of people behind, we're only hurting our entire country. So what it comes down to when you're looking at these urban markets in a place like Harlem is it just simply comes down to some level of leadership, where we can sit at the table with the mayor and say, you know what, when you're going to put in Link NYC, an outdoor Wi-Fi system that's a gigabit strong and all this other stuff, make sure that Harlem is included in those first runs. And they've done that. We've been able to be at the table to say that. So I'm here to create a new language around fairness, a new language around equity, to make sure that neighborhoods like Harlem are not left behind.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lee Moulton. I am the head of partnerships at Breather. We are an on-demand space company. Think Zipcar, but for commercial real estate. So one of the big things for me is that I've always kind of been the only African American at most jobs I've had. Started off my career at Goldman Sachs, did banking there, then I worked in the executive office as a deputy chief of staff for the CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, and the COO. After that, joined Breather as the fourth employee. We're now at 160 employees now. We've raised $35 million of venture capital. I'm still the only African American there, but we're going to change that. And the thing that's really powerful for me is that I work in my role of different companies, different startups, and there's not a lot of folks like me at across the table. I have some very strong views on why that is. I also come from a culture at Goldman Sachs which is very inclusive, which created an amazing pipeline to get minority talent to their firm, cultivate that minority talent, and put them in the C-suite. I've seen it happen. I know it takes time, and I have very strong views on how it's done. And it's a key thing for me to not only do that at our company at Breather, which is small, but help other companies that we work with do the same thing and cultivate that kind of pipeline.
My name is Tom Ogletree. I'm Director of Social Impact at General Assembly. I started my career in LGBTQ advocacy and have spent the last 12 years in the nonprofit sector, most recently at the Clinton Foundation with Terry. In my role, I'm really thinking about how do we promote diversity, access, and socioeconomic mobility through training in technology, data, business, and design. And at General Assembly, we're looking to empower people to pursue the work they love through training programs that really are designed for folks who don't have a background in these fields but want to quickly upskill and then find job opportunities using those new skills. And I think what we found is that for folks who have faced barriers to education and employment, getting them ready to thrive in programs like ours, and then providing them with the supportive services they need to persist in programs like ours, and then getting employers to think differently about folks who come from non-conventional backgrounds have been real challenges. And so we've been doing a lot of, I think, interesting partnerships here with the city, with nonprofits, with government agencies, including the EDC, to start to think through what are the potential solutions that we can start to experiment with to promote a more inclusive tech ecosystem.
Thank you all. Clayton, I was so intrigued the other day when we were talking and you said a fundamental challenge is that we framed this conversation incorrectly from the start. We talk about inclusion and diversity as a problem to solve rather than an opportunity that will help us grow. Can we talk about how we can reframe this conversation?
Yeah, so if some of you have been here all day, and this is a real critical topic, probably there's a lot of people who are not here that should be here. And so we know in a lot of ways, we're all on the same page here. But throughout my career, I have always heard diversity being framed as a problem. There's a problem in the tech industry with diversity, or there's a problem with diversity in the financial district. There's a problem with diversity in the cable industry. The fact of the matter is, we have to reframe that. Because once you call something a problem, there's a certain people that say, well, it's not my problem. It's like, well, I understand it's a problem, but it's not my problem. Well, the reality is diversity, and I want everyone to tweet it, but most importantly, consider it as you leave this place. Because if you haven't learned anything else, I hope you can just take this with you, which is diversity is an opportunity. It truly is. We work with a PhD lady that's blind. So when we talk with her, she sees things a different way. And we're able to create products and services that are much more robust as a result of getting her input. Intel will tell you a story about having an all-male engineering team. When they introduced a woman into the team, they created a new product, which is a wireless charging device that was designed largely due to her input. Diversity is an opportunity. I've been around long enough to see these great startups come and go. Anybody remember Friendster? Yeah, we all laugh about it, right? I've seen a zillion of them. They come and go. They were hot for a second, right? But what happens is they flame out because they don't embrace things like diversity. And just like Lee said, he's looking at an old establishment company and this kind of new startup company. Old establishment company seems to be getting it right. The young company, he's the only black in. So there's something about longevity, unfortunately, that sort of says, if you look at the top companies that are doing well with inclusion and diversity, they're all old companies, 50 to 100-year-old. How long did it take for them to get it right? But we're living in a new era now where we can accelerate that. We're more intelligent, we're more resourced, and most of us are growing up in more diverse communities. So look at it as an opportunity. Let's stop framing this as a problem, as Paulo and I just did a talk at the United Nations and talked about this very thing. And once we do that, everyone's included, right? Everyone can be included on an opportunity. We got a chance to do something great together. So if there's one thing I hope we can take back to our teams, take back to our bosses, take back to our families and friends, is let's frame diversity as an opportunity.
Great.
What's your Twitter handle so I can tweet that out?
So you can tweet it. I'm personally at Embertime, EMBERTIME, and then of course it's at Silicon Harlem.
I wanted to jump on that. So I agree with everything Clayton said. I would add that this is about cultural fit, right? We talk about getting people at the company, but we don't talk about retention. We don't talk about progress, okay? Getting people to the company, you just go to a HBCU and recruit a bunch of folks who got 4.0s. That's easy, right? But keeping them when there's cultural differences is a big thing. So I'm all about culture. The companies I think get diversity right have embedded in them from day one within the founders, whereas even if they're not the most diversity-aware people, they can at least hire people who are and create a culture that's inclusive. It's because it's about a culture where your race and your gender is not apparent, right? And that starts from the get-go. It starts with setting tones. So it's an opportunity for sure, but it's about culture and defining culture so that you just don't get people in the door. You keep them there and they're happy there.
So Lee, that's a great point, because I know we've all talked to founders who say, once we become successful, we'll really focus on diversity or inclusion. And it's about immediate shared values. But what is one thing you can do at the very beginning of creating a company to create that culture? What's one thing you can do?
So personally, I think people can educate themselves. If you're a founder and you've raised your round, and you probably are going to raise your round with your core team is going to be people who look like you, went to the same like that's just what happens. You got to educate yourself to the long game. It's very, there's a tendency to look into terms of the short game. I got this much run rate, I got this much runway, I got to go, I'll worry about that stuff later. But if you really take it upon yourself, almost like a new parent who's about to have a baby gets a ton of books and reads about all the different scenarios they're going to run into, you got to do the same thing.
What to expect when you're founding, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to do the same thing and take the same responsibility as a founder for the fact that the best talent is going to come in, will not necessarily look like you, sound like you, talk like you, don't know them. You have to like really take ownership in the cultural aspect and educating yourself about the different backgrounds of people who might come work at your company.
I always talk about with founders that you should be hiring to round out and enhance your perspective. I completely agree around culture, but one of the terms that I bristle at a little bit is like culture fit, because oftentimes that's code for somebody who looks and thinks just like me. And I'm again started with this group of awesome people, about 68 in total, and we're here today because we're hiring. And I talk to my team a lot about that. Like, I don't want to hire a bunch of sort of high energy, middle-aged ladies like me. That's not that interesting in terms of the perspective that is brought to the table. And for founders, I always say, who are you selling to? Are you selling to people that look just like you, or are you like a really huge big market across the world? Well, why aren't you hiring to bring in different perspectives and think differently? It's like the light bulb goes off a little bit sometimes around that. So it's like culture enhance, hire to complement.
So Kathleen, our mayor and presumably the entirety of the city embraces tech and believes that this sector and the community in the city can have a mutually beneficial relationship. Can you talk about how the city can partner both with the community and with the tech sector to make that a reality?
Yeah, and this isn't my shop, but one of my colleagues over at City Hall, who I think was speaking today, Kristen Titus. I don't know if she's still here. Tech Talent Pipeline, which is something that came out of the group that I now lead, but a number of years before my time. But this notion of bringing together communities, to Clayton's point, across the city, different demographics, different places, understanding where people are, what both needs and aspirations and talents are, and then also partnering with industry to understand what their needs and aspirations are, bringing academia to the table. We have an incredible convening power in addition to some of the other tools we have, but to bring folks together and understand where they are, to both meet, align in terms of outcomes, but also, I think Lee said, to educate, this notion of I have to hire a person from this college who has this degree that comes from this background because they're the only one who can do that job. That's just breaking up old ways of thinking. And the city has done incredible work with certainly computer science for all, K through 12, some of the work working very closely with schools, but with industry to break up that sense of who's a successful person and what do they need within the company to be successful. It's not simply the hardcore skills, it's also the culture around it that is going to support that person in their career at whatever company you're talking about.
The whole aspect of you can't be what you can't see, and you can't see a founder who looks like you, and you don't see someone in the industry who looks like you and is succeeding, can be really damaging over time. So Tom, you at General Assembly work on the supply side. You were really trying to create partnerships to work to train and educate the next generation of this industry workforce. Can you talk a little bit about that work?
Yeah, absolutely. At General Assembly, we're mostly offering programs in topics like web development, user experience design, data analytics, and those can be part-time programs that folks could take in the evenings, or full-time immersive programs that are really meant to take people who have no expertise in an area and within 3 months get them job ready and then help them find jobs. And we have 99% job placement rates within 6 months of people completing the programs. Thank you. One of the things that we found is that even though we have, broadly speaking, our community is diverse with respect to gender and race, we're 42% women, 47% people of color across our global campuses, most of those folks have college education, they've been in the workforce, in professional jobs, and they're career changers who are looking to get a new skill set. And so I think what we've really tried to think through is, a lot of the issues that folks have brought up today is how do you promote access for folks who didn't finish college, who maybe have a felony on their record, who have struggled in the workforce or are underemployed? How do we think through the different supportive services and resources that folks need to be able to not only get ready for an intensive training program like ours, but also get through it? And so I think this is where the new programs that were just funded through the Department of Labor, through the Tech Hire initiative that we're doing in partnership with LaGuardia Community College in Queens, Perscolas up in the Bronx, is thinking through how do we develop bridge models so that on the front end people are getting both skills, but also those employability and career readiness opportunities so they know what it's like to work in a corporate environment or a startup environment if they've only been in retail or manufacturing? How do we provide additional services so that folks can get through the program, so that that's living stipends or transportation stipends or computers or counseling services or childcare? And then how do we develop apprenticeships at the back end so that people don't have to go through a long job search to land the perfect job, but they can start making money right away, continue to support their families, and put them on a trajectory to more success in the workforce. So I think we're looking at a lot of different ways that you can start to address these things, but I think it's going to take a full constellation of actors in the sector, both on the employer side, on the training provider side, and then also on the educational side to get that early exposure so that people start to see themselves in these types of roles very early on.
It's a great point, and I think we were discussing earlier, we've done a lot of talking about coding and coders and the need to code and creating a culture around the need in that space, but there are hundreds of STEM and tech-related jobs that aren't coding, and to open up that conversation in a broader way to include those beyond those who are interested in studying to be an engineer or acquiring very specific skills in that space is an important piece of it too. Clayton, we talked about, often when we have conversations like this, we'll talk about institutional bias and bias, but we sometimes tend to forget that or take for granted that the infrastructure is already there. The foundation has been created in order to tackle that bias, but we still have a lot of work to do on that front. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And Kathleen, that's for you as well.
Okay. I'm glad you asked me that. Because I've been hearing about this disease called unconscious bias. It's a really interesting thing I've been hearing, for the last year, that there's a new disease. It didn't I guess it never existed before, but somehow after millions of dollars, we found out we all have the disease. We got unconscious bias. So I'm saying it with tongue in cheek because you can tell I'm a little skeptical about it. The reality is, it may be true that we all have our own biases, that's true. But what we're saying is there are companies that are getting this right? So let's sometimes call things what they really are. Sometimes you're just straight up racist. I mean, we have to be clear about that. There's plenty of evidence of that all over the place. So I think companies can get real lazy. They're just lazy. They're not trying. And as I mentioned earlier, there's been plenty of companies started and flamed out because they don't work hard to be a great company. This still boils down to being a great company with great people that are doing great things. And there's lots of evidence of companies that are doing that. And so to realize that your own company is not diverse and try to scientifically figure that out seems to me that you may be missing the exact point, which is you've got to make sure that the people you have working in your company embrace the values that you are looking to put forward. It really has been around a long time. I worked in the copier industry at Xerox. I saw a black president running a regional center. I saw a woman that was running a division. I saw somebody with a prosthetic being a part of our board. It's not that hard. This idea that we got to go deep and spend millions of dollars to figure out that we all have bias is not the ultimate answer. It's a good exercise. I get it. I wish they would have paid me. I would have told them just what I'm telling you today. But it really comes down to, do you want to have a great company that lasts the test of time? And if you do, it's just not a question of if. It's a question of when. You've seen all the statistics since you were kids. If you think about this one stat, and it's just crazy to me. You look at the world's working population. 10% of the world's working population is white male. That means 90% of the workforce is something else. So this isn't a sustainable thing. We've got to get out of this idea from a deficit model, as my co-founder Bruce Lincoln says. And we've got to look at this from an opportunistic way. given the resources that we have. So when we talk about the gap you just mentioned, millions of jobs are going to be available by 2024, 500,000 people prepared to fill them. The country has a decision to make. Do we go outside of our country and hire people or bring them into the country to fill those jobs? Or do we go look in Harlem or Chicago where there's 50% unemployment between 18 and 21-year-old kids that could be trained and skilled? This is a skilled economy. We have to figure out to use the Americans we have right here to fill some of those jobs.
But to that infrastructure point, they can't fill the jobs if they don't have as much access to broadband in Harlem or Wi-Fi or other. Kathleen, can you talk a little bit to how the city?
Yeah, no, and the broadband issue. One of the things that this administration is doing is, done a deep. We did do a study into broadband to really assess what the issue is, and I think sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And so I do think it's important, I think, as Lee said, also to take that look inside, educate yourself. But even more importantly, as Clayton, you point out, there's a point where, like, take the damn action, right? Just take the action. We can wring our hands. We can say whether it's an opportunity or problem. It doesn't matter unless you actually do something. And so with broadband, we are looking, both in terms of the industrial business zones, if I got the IBZs, I think I got that nomenclature right. But more importantly, where are the communities that don't have access to high-speed internet? That's the highway of our future, right? For communities to connect up, and certainly whether it's in my group, as I put my money where my mouth is and take action about building out a diverse team of people, and I see more companies do that, and I always, again, challenge entrepreneurs. You're supposed to make the impossible possible. You're supposed to do the crazy hard thing. So stop talking about it and go and do it. Like it's past the time for talk. We know it's an opportunity or whatever you want to call it. Go and do it. Make a difference.
Can I just make one quick comment? So just one quick comment. New York's doing as well as any city in the country in terms of advancing broadband, giving people an opportunity, trying to deal with digital divides or equity, all that kind of stuff. And we're lucky enough at Silicon Harlem to serve on the mayor's broadband task force. So our voice is being heard, and we appreciate that. EDC's been phenomenal investing in all these communities. But New York is like that shining star. You can think of these communities all around the country. But even in New York, I went to speak at an elementary school in East Brooklyn, PS 273. 0 smart boards, no computer lab, and very few computers in the classroom. 300 young kids, 98% African American. There's a statistic that the country thinks, the United States, the government thinks roughly around, I think the number is somewhere around, I don't know, what's the number, Bruce, of percentage of kids that are going to college, African American boys? Yeah, so it's somewhere around, I think, 10 to 15%. But the country absolutely knows that 3 out of 5 African American boys are going to jail. And when I looked at those kids, bright, smiley, flying around that school, creative, happy, but no access.
So the William Gibson quote, "The future is here, but it's just not evenly distributed." How are we evenly distributing the future? I want to turn to Lee and Tom and ask first, who in the audience, show of hands, hires? So what advice would you give to companies who are looking to mentor, to hire, to create a culture of inclusion? What recommendations or advice would you give?
I think the first step is to take an internal poll within the company and get people's feelings about it. Sometimes some of the best ideas come from internal because, depending on your culture, how busy you are, you don't have time to talk to the young lady who just joined 5 weeks ago and may feel uncomfortable in certain meetings. You can't. But if you create an anonymous but open culture where you can take feedback, I think you can start getting it right. What we did is we had an opt-in process saying we're putting together a diversity committee. Would you like to join if you have views on this? We try to make it inclusive of religion, sexual orientation. We got those folks in the room in our company because it was a perfect example of they're there and they're doing very well, so they understand the culture, but there's also a part of them that may not be the same part that our executive team understands as well. And we asked the question, how can, what can we do better? Not what are we sucking at, that's the wrong way to go about it, but
We're talking about solutions here today.
right. What can we do better to make this a more comfortable workplace, to attract more people that are like you? Or is this a place where you feel comfortable, where you think we're doing a good job, and how can we continue to do the good job? And that was helpful. So that would be my point. Look internally, get together a diverse coalition of folks who are good culture carriers and performing well within your context, and then get some of their ideas, then start making plans and implementing them after that.
And do they feel comfortable having those conversations in that context?
Some will, some won't. Some people don't want to talk from what makes them diverse, and that's totally fine, and that's their choice. But some people are extremely vocal about it and want to talk about it. You just got to find the right people there and get that going.
Yeah, I agree with all those points. I think one thing that we've been really exploring over the past year plus at GA is skills-based hiring, and how do you develop assessments that can sort of remove the kind of standard proxies that people use when assessing a candidate pool, whether that's where you went to college or the brands on your resume. How do you sort of take out some of the things around, past felony convictions or other sort of markers that often will sort of get people sorted out of the process before they've really had the chance to sort of demonstrate their talents or their skills. So we've been developing a set of assessments with a coalition of several hundred employers that are meant to be able to test folks at the top of the funnel on their web development or digital marketing skills. How well do you do in a testing environment, and how can we use the scores instead of the information on the resume as the starting point for saying, how do we start to bring people in the door and maybe see a different type of person who didn't go to school possibly or went to a community college, but knows how to do the job and is ready to take on that challenge if you give them the opportunity. And so I think that's another tool that we've been really starting to explore, and a lot of companies are really interested in, that I think could be a really powerful solution. We have the technology capacity, now let's put it to work.
We had also talked a little bit about how what seemed like very small changes can be impactful. You talked a little bit about language. Can you tell us?
Well, I mean, I think, something that we've found is even, for, the way that General Assembly operates, a lot of folks call us a coding boot camp. And we found that can be a really big turnoff for women. And so it's one of the things that we've been trying to do is to say, we're an accelerated education training provider. And that makes us more, open in terms of the types of audiences that we're able to connect with. And there are lots of different ways that language and framing and those types of, both in job descriptions, in the kind of contexts in which hiring and recruiting is done, in the way that you sort of communicate to prospective candidates, can play a really powerful role in terms of shaping even who shows up.
Great, thank you. I'd love for there to be an opportunity for folks to ask questions, so I think we'll go to do that. Hold on just a second.
This was amazing. Thank you. I have a question. It's far less sexy to consider startup enterprise in the intersection of municipal service delivery, tech, burgeoning, and population inclusion, which is basically urban planning, and of course the Board of Ed. So what would it look like and what would it require to get a tax-based incentive requirement for real estate development companies like, I don't know, Two Trees or Tish, or anything that's, for example, happening in my neighborhood, Clinton Hill, Brooklyn, which was a place you would go to do certain things, and now you're going there to do some other things. I feel like there are a lot of boot camps or advanced education opportunities in New York City. But what I feel like there's a complete lack of is a new business sector. And that's going to require multiple stakeholders. So it's not just up to entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs don't care. They want to make the next mobile app. What are you guys going to do about that?
Can I chime in first? Yeah, go ahead. All right. So I love your question. I think what's really important is that we don't leave off the entrepreneurs, actually. We often talk about public-private relationships. We like to say at Silicon Harlem, it's about private-public relationships, because the private sector does have a stake in the success of these communities. So a perfect example is if we can start to direct the VC money or any of these investment monies to not just go towards the next app that's looking for how you buy your most expensive mattress, and start looking at I guess on all that, the Uber of mattresses. But you want to figure out how to fund ideas that are trying to solve problems. I think the ultimate goal, for example, for President Obama, when he leaves office, what is he going to do? A lot of people talk about him going to work for a VC firm like a lot of other folks that have come out of government do. Why wouldn't he put his energy towards funding companies, startups, businesses that are trying to solve problems in their community? So I think there is a solution. It's going to take a lot of moving parts, but I think it's going to be a private-public solution. EDC does great work with figuring out those exact policy issues on how to make sure that funding can be added from both the private and public sector. So I think it's got to include the entrepreneurs. I think it has to include the nonprofits. I think it has to improve the government, and it's going to need leadership.
Well, I don't know that it's a reorg. I think it's just a scaling of efforts that are already afoot. I mean, we, for example, through our strategic investments group, have an emerging developer fund where we look at emerging developers, which are often people of color and white women, and to support people who are getting into the business who typically have not been supported. We have other incentive programs that look at neighborhoods across the city. We had a tech fund before my time, but in the investments made, ensuring that those investments were made across a swath of New Yorkers. In our programs, we have a Venture Fellows program that is, I don't know, I want to say 60% women. I don't know the number on people of color, and I apologize. But these are, we started a life sciences fund to invest in life sciences companies. Life science has impact on every single New Yorker. Our health matters to us, in whether it's diabetes, heart disease, cancer, So we have done things as a city to signal and partner across industry. There is, again, more work to be done, but I'm proud, and again, I can't take credit, I've been there 6 months, but I'm proud of some of the work that EDC has done. We just launched something called, oh gosh, I'm going to not remember it, but it's a partnership both with CUNY to help get HB1 visas for immigrant entrepreneurs. And as we know, Thank you, Jen, into NYC, where given that an amazing 60-70% of New Yorkers are either immigrants or children of immigrants, that is a key piece for us to support across our city.
I'm going to add one thing there. This is really high level. We don't sell tech to the young people enough, right? So music sells itself, right? A lot of kids go to studios, they want to become a rapper, they're on YouTube, they're on SoundCloud, being very entrepreneurial, right? Some of these kids are making comedy shorts on Instagram, making $1 million a year. That's happening, right? That's entrepreneurship, right? Using a tech platform. The sports industry, look at the big deal the NBA is about to sign. The pipeline of talent going into sports for young kids is bigger and better than ever, right? They do a good job of selling themselves to the young folks and pushing and extracting their talent, right? And I think that one of the things that me and my friends do is our friends who are teachers, we try to go into the schools, go into the classrooms in our free time and try to make tech as sexy, right? We can have all the programs we want, okay? Kids come to school to hear about another person, another program, they don't care. They want to see something that, one, looks like them, but also that they think is cool, that they think is respectable, that they can talk about. So I think, and this is a very high-level comment, but I think we can do a much better job as school systems, as people who want to give back, people who have nonprofits to help in this tech sector, to stop just hitting these kids with the skill sets and all that stuff. That's not cool to them. That's boring to them. It's another class. But trying to sell like the glamour and lifestyle of being a tech entrepreneur or being a person who works at a tech company, but not in a Silicon Valley television show kind of way, but in a real practical way of real people who look like them. So that's one thing I'd add there.
I know we got a question back here. I'm just going to just quickly follow up on Lee and say, I just want to make everybody should know this. Tech goes across everything.
Yes.
There is no such thing necessarily as just tech. All right? If you're in sports, you got to deal with tech. I've been fortunate in my career. I've worked in movies. I've worked in video games. I've worked in comedy, helped launch South Park, all these great things. One thing was in common. They all required technology. So to your point of showing them the sexy part of life, it's all life. Everything. You don't have to be a tech person and work in a tech company. You could be a tech person and work, at American Express or at Burger King or at Hollywood. So I'm just building on your point. Go ahead.
So this was wonderful, and actually, as one of you had mentioned, racism, sort of as or at least prejudice that we naturally are inclined maybe towards with our own social location, maybe what we're comfortable with, what we're used to. I started to think about on a micro level also how much in our own social lives, for myself a while back, I realized, wow, I'm really only hanging out with my girlfriends lately, where are the guys? And then last year I was actually asked to be a judge for an assistive technology competition for people with disabilities, and I was the only girl of 4 that were chosen, but obviously then there's diversity of disability as well. So I was thinking, why am I the only girl? But then I realized, okay, wait, we have somebody here with MS. We have somebody here that's blind. I have cerebral palsy. Paul has autism. There's so many gradients of diversity that I was thinking about how much of it actually starts at the social level. You know what I mean? Because we often hire our friends and people we know to be capable. So I started to think about how can I widen that base, but also the idea of counting my friends or colleagues like beans, like here, this covers this category or not, can be very complicated, And I think maybe this is idealism, but I wonder if the solution is more to encourage as many people as possible to talk to as many people as possible, so that I love to talk to cab drivers and doormen and people of all backgrounds and from every ethnicity and social location. And I wonder, though, if that's something, obviously this isn't necessarily for the mega companies that already have these issues, but maybe for entrepreneurs to really look to expand their social circles so that maybe, inclusion can happen naturally and organically. Does that make sense?
I mean, a lot of hires come from referrals, right? And so there's this whole notion of weak networks, and I'm sort of a serial connector, and one of the things that I'm particularly mindful and intentional of are how do I connect it with other connectors who have access into circles that I don't have. And as I said, I've known Wayne for 5 years. Wayne has a whole different set of people that he knows. Natalia, who was one of the judges, Natalia and I are friends for the same reasons. We sort of gravitate to each other as connectors, but with access into different circles that complement and expand each of our respective sets. Right. So that's super, super important within, I think, frankly, being a human being to understand different people, but also very much so in growing ecosystems and building.
I totally agree. Yeah. So my background is I was born in Wisconsin to Liberian parents, right? Moved to Liberia when I was 3, which was weird. Left when I was 6 because of the war. Grew up in North Carolina, then went to private school for high school in Massachusetts, college there, and then came to New York. So you develop what W.E.B. Du Bois calls the double veil, in my case, the quadruple veil, where you just become comfortable being uncomfortable, right? You know how to relate to all kinds of people. And I probably wouldn't be at Breather or have been at a lot of things I was doing if I didn't have that kind of life experience. So there is definitely a correlation between minorities who have experience being uncomfortable. Usually it's like if you're a top flight minority student, you've probably been, pretty in a pretty rare area most of your schooling and most of your career. So you're probably going to be more likely to be comfortable around people who don't look like you, don't act like you, whatever. But I think for folks who didn't have the privilege and who probably grew up in a less diverse, in terms of experience background, it's much harder for them. So I think being sensitive to that as a company and kind of really understanding who's at that table, but why they're at that table, what about them got them to that table, and who's not at that table because of what they don't have is a step in the right direction.
And also to challenge. I mean, we've all heard I didn't hire a woman engineer because I don't know any women engineers. Okay, well, there's a fairly easy solve for that. And I think it's just a reminder, too. We've discussed a lot of to-do items on this panel. Even if we check them all off, inclusion is an ongoing experience for everybody. So how we think through different ways in which we can be more inclusive is going to be with us all of the time. Do we have
Right here.
how much? I think we have
Last
one
question.
or yeah.
I have the mic. Yeah, sorry. Hi. My question is in relation to something you guys mentioned a little bit earlier. You said Lee was mentioning, tech. A lot of different media, such as like music and stuff like that, is like sexy, and like kids want to be a part of it. So what I realized is that tech consumption is sexy, but tech production isn't sexy. So how do we change that language? Because that's what my biggest barrier was at first, is that I'm interested in tech, but when I talked about it, everyone has an iPhone, everyone uses these services, but like when I talked about producing it, it was the problem. So how can we make tech production sexy, not only tech consumption sexy?
Can I just answer the question a little bit differently, and then Leo will answer it directly. But I'm going to answer it a little bit off direct. What's happening here is, and I'm with you on your premise, which is we need to be making makers versus takers, right? So we need to be making sure people are making it as much as they're consuming it. And so part of that, when we talk about a tech ecosystem, we're talking about getting people exposed to computational thinking at a very early age, right? In kindergarten, literally, starting to work around how to solve problems. Because once you've trained your mind to do that, you start to think like I did when I was a kid. My father was a great father, so he had microscopes and telescopes and stuff that I could always tear apart and put back together. And it made me go, whenever I saw something, I go, I bet you I could build that, or I bet you I could make that. I saw that show. I bet you I can do a better script. All that stuff is how we're training people from an educational perspective. That's why we have to look at that in general, the reimagination of education. But I think you have to start at a very young age, making sure that becomes part of their culture. And there's nothing wrong with consuming stuff, but you ought to have a mind that says, you know what, I might be able to make that. Some of you taste food at a certain restaurant and you go, I bet you I can make that when I get home. That's what we want people to think. And again, this isn't just about technology. This goes across the board of all business. And I just want to make one last comment and let Lee do this, but you mentioned racism. I was talking in Minnesota a couple years back, and a white guy stood up and said, I'm a reformed racist. I said, whoa, what? And the point was, but the point is, racism is a taught behavior. And if something can be taught, it can be unlearned. And we're hoping that some of this environment we're living in right now, which has this charged language, gets tampered down because it's bringing out the ugly in people. But it's a learned behavior. So if it can be learned, it can be unlearned.
I'm just gonna say quickly to your point. I meet people every day who are like, man, I had this idea for an app, right? I think people have great ideas and they have a desire to do it. It goes back to access to capital and resources. I feel like if in every school, kids who had an app idea could come into a computer lab and just like have a resource to build it or learn how to build it, I think more kids would do it. I think it's a resource issue. It's a capital issue, why we don't see more makers. But I don't think there's a dearth of people who don't have great ideas, who don't want to create things. There is a dearth of the means to do so.
Well,
Personally.
President Clinton used to say, I worked for him for a short time. He used to say, intelligence is distributed evenly everywhere. Access and exposure is not. That's the deal. How much time do we have?
I think
Got
we
like
have.
a bunch of hands up.
I think we have run over time. Are we still?
Let's keep it going.
Okay, let's keep. When we go over.
Wayne, how many questions?
Two
more.
more? Okay. Is it somebody right over there?
Mine will be quick. I just wanted to ask what you kind of saw as Band-Aid solutions versus root cause, if you were to frame it in that kind of mindset. Just stuff you've seen and what you feel like some of the root cause of inclusion is. Thank you.
When you talk about solutions, I think a great solution that I've seen work at big companies and small companies is making the business case for diversity. Like going out and showing them the reports that look at what Sheryl Sandberg did when she went to Facebook and how she completely transformed that company and was a leading force in them being $350 billion in market cap right now. Talking about how diverse boards, diverse leadership teams make better decisions, have better stock prices, and have an overall happier employee, NPS score. So I think that's something that I've seen as a true solution has been working to transform even the most bigoted minds, because one thing people love a little bit more than feeling like they're progressing is they love money. If you make the business case for diversity, that's been effective.
And there's a lot of data out there on this.
Right. A lot of data. And the people who put together that data, thank God for them, because it's been effective. The Band-Aid solutions, I think, are having quotas. Like, hey, we're going to have 15%, or we're going to try to match the percentage of people at our company to the general population, or the general college graduation pool. Those things, I think, become numbers-oriented. People start playing to the numbers, and they also don't take into account C-suite or promotions at the company, how much people get paid, so all that stuff. So that's my quick answer.
I think programs that work the best are tied into a larger set of initiatives. So, it's great to have a strong recruiting program, but if you don't have a strong professional development and retention and promotion program, you're going to fail. And, as a woman, I always look at these programs, women lead the workforce, because no, it's because it's not necessarily a hospitable place for women. So to the extent that, know what you can do, but understand how you fit into a larger set of there's a larger set of solutions, and tying those together, to me, is the longer term play. And when you don't do that, if you just have one thing, this is the one thing. It's not one thing. It's a set of things.
I think there's also a well-intentioned instinct that first says, okay, well, I'll resolve this with a diversity training rather than an inclusion strategy, right? I mean, I think it's we laugh, but it's a first instinct, but that's merely one step in a larger strategy. One more question, I think.
Okay.
Over here.
Hi, my name is DC Livers. I'm with the Historical Black Press Foundation, and we publish directories. But more importantly, if any of you have ever gone to a Black blog, 9 times out of 10, they've got the content from us. We're the largest provider of Black digital content on the web, and I bet none of you have heard of us. So to make it easy, I've put together the Who's Who in Black blogging directory so we can stop the conversation on how to find them, right? On the cover is Wayne Sutton. Somebody that's in the room, Daria Fennell. If you guys don't know her, can you wave your hand, Daria? We've worked together in Washington, D.C., help converting content from the mayor's office to the White House and different stuff. The conversation to me, I've been over here almost yelling the BS word because I feel like we're missing so many people. I mean, my audience don't have computers at home, so they go to the library and they waste their 40 minutes to come to our website. You have guys like this gentleman over here who's killing it. He's typing this thing as we speak. There are so many people that aren't here, the young thug that nobody wants to talk about or talk to. They always say to me, DC, you speak for us. 30% of our audience is in Western Africa and Black London. We're not talking on a global level to people of color. So I really just want to first thank you for providing 5 passes for our audience to come today. That was so fantastic. Thank you so much. They're also following on Twitter and the hashtag on Black Twitter and all that. But I really just want to see if we can figure out how to diversify schools. If 80% of public schools are white women, and how are these kids going to get the information you're talking about? How are they going to get to know that LEGO has a program that will let them literally design robots and things of that nature? How are we going to, so if we can maybe bring it back to kind of what I call the throwaway community, the regular people on the street, if we could figure out how to reach them, that I think will really help. And, but anyway, this is a great conference. Thank you so much for letting me be here.
I think, Tom, you should probably address that a little bit. I mean, we are looking at kids that have dropped out of school. We're looking at kids that have had records. We're looking at people that have no access. That's what's called an opportunity. We got to stop framing it as a problem. It's not a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of access and exposure. If you're a young 18-year-old and you can't seem to get into certain places, but the guy on the street is telling you, I got plenty of access for you, man. Just run this package over for me. We've got to start providing an alternative to that kind of life. And that's where that type of training and that type of schooling and that type of how do we connect with them on what they want to be interested in becomes vital. So what you're saying is spot on. We need to not ignore the great resource we have in this country, which is those people who often get overlooked and don't get the access and exposure. Once you give it to, I have a friend in Compton. He flies helicopters. Introduced it to young kids in Compton. All of them have helicopter licenses now as a result. Would have never thought about doing that. Most of them dropped out of whatever gang they were involved in and now are trying to create a career in that. We are not overlooking these people, but we got to give them more access and exposure.
Yeah, and this is where I think there are a lot of really tremendous organizations. You think about Urban TXT in South Central that's doing a lot of exposure and training on the ground and making it exciting and cool and sexy for young people to sort of see that these to be makers is really something that they want to do. I also think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of rethinking all the various touch points, not just for young people, but we're doing a program in partnership with The Last Mile out in San Francisco that's doing entrepreneurship and coding training in San Quentin Prison and working with inmates there to build up their skills, build up their portfolio. They're getting paid to build websites for California state agencies. They're going to finish their sentences and come back into society with money, with a portfolio, with a set of skills. And I think that there are a lot of ways in which innovative partnerships and different organizations that are touching communities that are often left behind can really play an incredible role in terms of reaching folks who are often left out of this conversation, not just kids, but also other parts of our population.
So this is a, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lee.
I was gonna say, so sorry we didn't touch on that, because what you're saying is right. There are a lot of organizations hard at work at this. The one I'm most proud of is internet.org. Mark Zuckerberg's putting his money where his mouth is. He has drones flying over like literally jungle areas in Zaire, providing free internet access, and he's helping on the ground, getting people mobile phones that can get them on the internet and be able to transact currency. So these things are happening. We're trying to basically level the playing field. What you're speaking to is you want a level playing field. Can we just get, this guy has this technology, can everyone get the technology so everyone's going to be on the same playing field? That's a socioeconomic thing that's happening. A lot of folks are working on it, NGOs, governments, and some private organizations. It's a big thing, and I agree. It will create the seismic shift. When everyone has the same playing field, it would create the seismic shift to start seeing some of these further results, like folks getting in the General Assembly, getting the skill sets, getting the jobs. You're right, it starts there.
So, but thank you for reminding us to say very explicitly, this is an enormous conversation with so many facets, and we've had an hour. Thank you for that, Wayne. But we could go on for hours. You have tremendous resources up here. So thank you to everybody here.
Thanks, Terry.